Today we're going to show you how to make these gorgeous string quilts. They're quick and easy to make and they're just adorable. And you make them simply using the scraps from your stash. How wonderful is that? So let's get started and show you how to do it.
Okay, so your first step is to create your blocks. So you can do this a number of different ways. We sew directly onto the batting itself, but you can sew onto paper piecing squares, or you can sew onto a foundation, a bit of material as well, but we just find sewing straight onto the batting is a really nice, easy way to do this. So what you need are some strips, obviously, and these can be cut into any width you like. Now, if you want to create a particular sort of pattern and you want to piece these together so they form a particular pattern, you might want to stick with the same width for your strips. So you could use jelly roll strips, for instance, where they're all cut the same width. But I quite like the idea of all these different widths like this, and when you form it together, you see it still works, you know, with all these different widths here. So it comes out quite nice. So you need some batting to work with. When you cut your squares of batting, just cut them a little bit bigger than what your square will be. So just say you want a 10-inch square, for instance, just cut it maybe 10.5 inch. So you've got a bit of leeway to trim at the end of it, because when it comes to sewing on batting, it can sort of distort a little bit. Although these are small, it's not too bad, but that can still happen. So it's just better to have a bit extra and cut away at the end. So the first step is to take one of the pieces of batting, grab a strip, whichever one you like, and we're going with a yellow theme here, which is quite nice. Grab a strip like that, pop it in the middle, and then grab another one. And what we're going to do is pop it over the top like that, so the edges line up along here. And what we're going to do now is sew straight down this edge here, so that when we sew and open her up, it'll be sewn on like that. So I'll go and do that now. Okay, so I'm ready to sew now. So just remember that the bottom piece is facing upwards, the top piece is facing on top of it, downwards. And you can pin this if you like. Start a little bit back from the edge. You do probably a 1/4 inch seam here, but really with this technique, it doesn't really matter what seam you use, really. We have that there now. What we do is we go over to the iron. You wanted to iron these in between each piece. Don't wait till the end to iron. Do it in between each row. So the next step now is to grab another piece of material and do exactly the same thing. So I've got this one here. So what I'll do is I'll probably pop it on this side, I think. So I'm going to pop that one again, face down, on one of the other bits there. Like that. Grab my scissors. Just chop off the end. Come back to the machine and sew again. This really is a quick and easy way of making a quilt. And back to the iron again and do the same thing. You see look how nice that looks already. Another piece. and so on. So you just keep going, doing the same thing. So here's another piece, face down again on there, and it's so along there again. And then just keep going until the whole piece is finished. If you get to the end here and you've even got a tiny little bit, you have to fill in every single little bit. So just be prepared and get yourself a piece when you're coming to the end here, say. You've gotten to a bit like that. Just make sure you use a bit that's big enough to cover even that bit there. So that would work if I folded that there. Bring it over. So I'll continue sewing those now, and I'll show you what it looks like when that's finished. So I've finished the block now. I've sewn all the strips on and ironed them all down, so they're looking good. Looks quite good at the moment. So, well, it doesn't look that great, so what we will do is cut the edges off. So what you want to do is just turn her over like that and just cut straight down the edges there. If you've made your batting a little bit bigger, you want to trim it to the exact size you want. I'm not going to worry too much for this tutorial. I'm just going to trim right down the edges here. This is the best part, actually, cutting these off, because you get to see the result at the end and it looks awesome. This is my favourite quilt to make because it's so quick and easy. Okay, turn her over. And look at that, doesn't that look awesome? It looks amazing, I love them. So you need to do that with every block that you want to create. So just keep going until you've got enough blocks to create your quilt. So we will go on to the next step now and show you how to put it all together.
So as you can see, we now have our 6 squares completed. I'm only doing 6 squares for this tutorial, but you can make this quilt as big as you like or as small as you like. So now the idea is we have to actually join them together. And so what I've done is I've cut some 1-inch strips, and I'm going to show you what we need to do. So we don't put any strips down the side or along between the rows at this stage. All I'm doing is getting the rows organised. So I've got them in the order I want them, and then I'm pinning a 1-inch strip to one edge. I'm leaving the next edge of the next block and putting a 1-inch strip here, and you'll see how this works when we come to adding these all together. As I say, we're not going to put a strip down the edge. We're not putting one through here or the top and the bottom at this stage. That will all come later. So what you do is take your 1-inch strip and just lay it down the side. Now you can pin it or not, whatever suits you. I like to stick a couple of pins in. So just to make sure that everything's meets nicely. So just put one there. And as you can see here, I haven't sliced these ones yet, but I'll come back and tidy that up in a moment. Okay, so now as this is going to be the finished size of what I'm doing, you'll see that I've only pinned to these middle pieces here and this side. Nothing on the side again, nothing on the top, nothing on the bottom, and nothing in between. We'll get to that. So there we go, on to the next step. So now I'm going to put the sashing on, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to do this for each piece that I've got pinned. Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to press that flat, and then I'm going to do the same to the other pieces that I have pinned, and then I'll show you the next step. Now, as you can see, I have my strips sewn on, and I'm going to trim the long ones so that they're the same size as the squares. You can actually do this at the start if you're confident. You can cut them to the same size as the edge. I like to leave myself a little bit of leeway. I'm just going to trim that off. And now we're going to start attaching them together. So this is what it'll look like. We'll have a, you can see there, and this is how I do it. Okay, so I bring that one, bring it over on top, so I've got right sides facing, and make sure you line the edges up. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is push that sashing over so I've got right side to right side. Okay, so it was down like this. Just push it up and bring that square on to meet it. Now I like to work from the other side, from the sashing side, so I'll just turn that over. Just line it all up. Pop a couple of pins in there. Okay, as I say, make sure your squares line up, one at each end, and then we're going to sew that with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'll go and do that, and then I'll show you exactly how that looks. But you get the general idea that those will open and my seam will be there once it's sewn on. Alright, so let's go and do that one. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam. I like to just push this part here back that way so that the foot runs alongside it. Okay. You can see we've got our first piece of sashing sewn, and I will go and iron that in a moment, and this is what the reverse side will look like. It'll meet nicely there when it's pressed down. Now that the blocks are sewn together, I'm going to join the 2 rows. So I have a strip here that I've cut, that's 1 inch. I'm going to lay it along one row. So this, you can leave a bit of an overhang. I find it's easier to cut off after, or you can cut it to length. It's entirely up to you. So we'll just pin this, and we're going to sew it with a 1/4 inch seam, same as we did the other strips. When you come to your strips, when you're pinning and sewing, make sure that they are sitting nice and flat on the reverse, okay? So don't pull those seams apart. Okay, so I'll go and sew this now, and as I say, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam, same as before. I'll do that, then I'll come back and show you the next step. Okay, so I've sewn that on. As you can see, I've used a 1/4 inch seam and just press that forward. So now I need to join these 2 together, so I bring this top one over, right sides together. Now, as I said before, I like to work from the other angle, so I will turn this again, so I like to be able to see this side. So in this part we need to make sure we line everything up, our seams included, our seams on our other squares, and then we're going to pin that all together. And because everything's nice and square, everything should fit together neatly. So we're going to pin that on. And you can see how quick and easy this is, and they look really great. And it's a great way of using up all of your scraps in your stash, because sometimes it's a bit hard pressed to look for ideas. But I'm going to turn this into probably a table runner, because I've only done the 6 squares just to demonstrate the technique. But you could certainly keep on adding to it and making it into a lap quilt or a big quilt like the one behind me. Okay, so now I'm going to sew that on, and then we'll have our nice neat edging here. Now look how great that is coming together. So I'll go and do that, and then I'm going to show you the next step, which is to put a strip right around, and I'm going to use a contrasting colour, and I'll show you that when we get to it. So now we're going to attach our borders, and we're going to work with the short ends of the quilt, so that'll probably be your top and the bottom. And what I have here are 2 pieces of sashing that are 1 inch each, one for the top, one for the bottom, and then I have a border piece which is 2 inches. Now I've only made it 2 inches because this is going to be a table runner, and on the back of the border piece I've also got some batting. When we did our quilt we actually made the border piece 3 inches, so you make it according to the size of the item that you're making. So what I'm going to do now is take one of these sashing strips, put them face up. Now I've cut mine a little bit longer than necessary, but I like to give myself a bit of leeway. You don't have to, you can cut them to size if you wish. So I'm going to pin those together, and then I'll sew the sashing and the border piece together with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'll just stick a couple of pins in there. Okay, and the same with the other piece. Alright, so I'll now go ahead and sew these together, and then we'll come back and show you what to do next. My sashing is now attached to my border piece, and you can see I've used a 1/4 inch seam to attach that, and then just pressed it back. And I'm now going to attach this to the bottom of the quilt. So I take my pieces and I just flip them over and put right sides together, and then I'm just going to pin Now I'm going to go and sew that along here with a 1/4 inch seam, and then when we flip that down you'll see that that will be my sashing and my border. So I'm going to do that on each end of the quilt, of the short ends. Then we'll come back and we'll show you what we're going to do with the long ends, because that's a little different. Now this is beginning to look awesome. Now I have my top and bottom borders attached with the sashing. And now we're going to attach the border to the long sides of the quilt. Now to do that, you need to just fold the one we've just attached, the bottom border, fold it in at both ends. And you're going to cut your side strip to that length, so exactly to that length. Now I know you think, oh, what's happening here? But that's because we're going to put in a contrasting square. And we also need a little piece of sashing. So what we'll do is attach the sashing, which has got, the border has got batting on it. So we're going to attach our little piece of sashing across there. And then we're going to attach it to this little square. So that's going to be our next step, and we're going to do that on all 4 corners, and then we'll come back and we'll do the next step. So I've sewn my sashing to both ends of this border strip, and now I'm going to add the feature square, and again it's just like the rest of the quilt. I'm just going to pin that along here, and I'll sew it with a 1/4 inch seam, and that will be that part finished. So now you can see that I've added my squares, my feature squares, to each of the corners, and now I'm going to sew my inch piece of sashing to the border. So I'll just run that down there, I'll pin that, and I'll sew that on with a 1/4 inch seam. I'll do that to both of these. Now because when you're doing a large quilt, you're going to find that your sashing pieces, of course, are going to need to be joined, and I've got that problem just here. Well, it's not really a problem. So I'm going to just sew those two together, just so that that gives me enough sashing to finish it off. So I've attached the sashing to the border. Now we're going to pin this to our main part of our quilt, and so it's just a matter of turning this over face down, so we've got face down together with our sashing to the edge. Just make sure that your sashings line up here. You want that nice and neat. Now I'm going to pin this together, and then I'm going to sew it with a 1/4 inch seam, and that will be on both sides, and then I'm going to come back and we'll finish her off. The next thing we need to do is attach our backing. Now you can do this one of two ways. You can either measure your piece, your quilt, and cut your backing accordingly, or you can do what we've done and you can just lay your piece down onto your backing material and cut round it using this as a template. I'm now going to pin the two pieces together, so right sides together. There's my main piece, there's my backing. I'm going to pin them round, and I'll sew them with a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. I'm going to leave an opening. Now, because this is only a small piece, I'll leave about 4 or 5 inches. If you're doing a quilt, you probably want to leave about 8 inches because you've got all that bulk to bring through when you turn it through. I'm also going to clip the corners before I bring it through. So I've now attached the backing using a 1/4 inch seam, and here is my opening on one end, so one of the short ends. I've just left this opening to turn it through. Now before I turn it through, I'm going to clip the corners, and to do that I like to come in and just start a little way back and then clip to the corner, just being very careful that you don't clip the stitching, and that just removes the bulk, so when you turn it through it'll have a nice edge. So I've clipped my corners, and now I'm just going to pop my hand in here and grab a corner and drag it through, and the other one through, and turn the whole quilt through. So there we go. And I left quite a wide opening to make it nice and easy. You want to pop your corners out. I actually use an apple core to get them nice and crisp, but just push them through. I'll fix those up in a moment. Just want to show you how this looks. Okay, so here we are, we're nearly finished. We're going to, doesn't look great. I think those colours just go together so well. So I'm going to just turn these in, and we can top stitch all the way around, or you can hand stitch if you wish, and then we'll just stitch around just to hold it all in place nicely. So now that the quilt is turned through, what we've done is we've ironed this down to give us a nice crisp edge, and that's our opening. So we're now going to top stitch all the way around. I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in there just to keep it in place while I top stitch it. And I'll just go around it probably at about 1/8 of an inch, just to give it a nice finish. Okay, so we'll get started on that. Around the edge just means you don't have to hand sew that opening closed. I'm averse to hand sewing, so I don't do it unless I really have to. Just come up to about 1/8 of an inch of the end there. Turn around. So I'm going to do this all the way around. So I'll continue doing this and then we'll come back and we'll show you the ditch stitching. So now it's time to do our stitching, and we're going to start up here and we're going to pull our thread through and tie them off, and we're going to sew right down the centre. We're starting in the centre just so it keeps it all nice and even. We come down to here. When we get here, we're going to leave some threads, so make sure you leave a long bobbin thread as well as a top thread for tying off. And then we're going to sew, we're going to come over here and we're going to sew down this side right up to the end, and again leave some thread to tie off. So that will be that. We'll then tie those off, and then we're going to do the cross sections, and we're going to do those exactly the same. Start here, pull our bobbin thread up, sew across to the end, leave threads long enough to tie up, and again down this side, and we'll do that on both of those strips. Now our next stitching line is going to be on these long sashing pieces, and we're going to start here at the stitch line. Okay, so we already have a stitch line there, so we're going to start there at the side. We're going to work our way in the ditch right up to the top, and we're going to pivot on that stitch line when we get to it and sew across. So we're actually going to sew this time across that line and then pivot and come down here. And when we get to the bottom, we're going to pivot and then come back to where we began, and again leave our long threads for tying off. So we'll do that on both of the long edges on either side, and the last steps are this stitching along here. So again we're going to start at the stitch line, sew across to the end, and we'll pivot and come down the other side, get to the stitch line, pivot and sew across and come back to where we started, and we'll do that on both ends, and that will give us a nice pattern on the back as well.
So I'm just going to start sewing in the ditch now. Now the good idea is to start in the middle of your quilt. It'll stop things from warping around and just set it in place. So I'm going to start here and come right down the middle here. So I want to bring up the bobbin thread first so that we can tie it off. So I'm going to start there, so I bring that under my needle and I use the wheel on the side of the sewing machine and hold my thread here. So I hold my needle thread in front and I just bring this down until it hits that point, which is just about there, and in it goes, and then I bring it back up again, and that will bring up the bobbin thread. On this, while I do that, feel it coming through there, and up there it is there. So there you go, there's the bobbin thread. I just grab a pin now and just pull it through. There you go. Alright, so our bobbin thread is up now, and we can use that to tie this off later on. Alright, so now I begin. So I'm going to put my foot down, just going to bring this down to start in that point. Just to make sure I'm starting right bang on. There we go. Should put my needle in the down position because I have that on my machine. It's always a good one to use. And away we go. So what you want to do while you're doing this, keep it slow if you've never done this before, and you're just slightly spreading apart. You don't want to spread too far because you don't want to just, you don't want to tear stitches or anything, but just basically hold it open so you can sew nicely down the line there. And we're using purple thread here to match this, but it's up to you which way you go. I know some people sometimes sew a little bit to the left or right of the ditch line, but I like to sew right inside it wherever possible. Good to use a walking foot for this too, forgot to mention that. A walking foot and an open toe foot is fantastic, because you can see here, I can see exactly where to sew. I'm coming up to the end here. So what I want to do is go a little bit slower. Now if you've got a machine like mine where you've got a button here to allow you to cut the thread, don't do that, because what we want to do is leave a thread free. So I'm just going to bring that up, and bring that out so I do have some thread here, because what I want to do is tie off the stitches there too. Okay, so there you go. So that's actually, just cut the bobbin thread back there, sewn in the ditch down there. So I'll go back now and sew up here. That's basically what you need to do to sew in the ditch there.